How are the communities you're serving impacted by the twin pandemics of racism and COVID-19? And what has been the ministerial response to those impacts?
I'll address COVID first. I have students who are, on one hand, very, very given to science and will listen to science over rhetoric and personal opinion. And I have students who also are immunocompromised, or they're aware that there's an immunocompromised person in their families that they see regularly. I have students who deal with anxiety and depression in some pretty significant ways. And so this age of COVID has created a context that could have isolated most of our students that we serve. Many of them made a decision early on that they were not going to go do a lot of things because they were immunocompromised, or they needed to stay home because it was really impacting their mental health. Be afraid to go to the grocery store, and what if they caught something? And then the students would just look at the science. They would see cases going up. It's like, we can't act like this isn't a thing. Like, we can't just go about life like everything's normal. It's not normal. And so what our response to that had to be, we were already doing online ministry, but we had to really double down on our online ministry. And about 95% of what we do right now is online. And I'm so grateful that we've done that, because it has actually kept these students from being isolated. They are still in community. They are still connecting. We're still serving them. Though serving them now looks like FaceTime meetings and Zoom meetings and Facebook Live, virtual worship and things like that. And we do a little bit of in-person stuff, but it's outdoors, masked, socially distant. And so that's the way that we have been able to come alongside them in this particular moment of COVID. And I'm really grateful for that. As far as the second pandemic of racial tension in our country, I do tend to reach a group of students that have a degree of societal engagement and cultural engagement, social engagement. They are not interested in sitting on the sidelines and watching the world burn. They are people who are like, we want to be involved, we want to move towards solution, and we're going to call out evil as we see it. Some of them are more constructive than others, and that is the way that it is. But my students have been involved in Black Lives Matter protests, and they've made statements on social media, and they've donated to organizations. And one of the things that we want to do in CCW is make sure that we are a fully accessible, fully inclusive community and a ministry. And so they've asked some deep, deep questions about, are we just talking about Black Lives Matter? Are we just talking about inclusion? Are we actually doing the work of inclusion? And so I've been really heartened at their desire to make space for people who are differently abled, to make space for the LGBTQ community. They've even wanted to make sure they've made space for those with differing political views, specifically views that may not agree with things like Black Lives Matter, because we do want to be fully inclusive. And I see all of that as a response to this uptick of racial tension in our country.
Well, in particular, I want you to think about the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, which happened in Florida. What have these deaths meant to you personally, Derrick, to your students and to your ministry?
As a Black man in this country, it is hard to overstate how nervous I can become when I'm in certain parts of the city, how nervous I can become at rhetoric, how nervous I can become with certain types of leadership. And the last several months has been a re-education in the people around me who honor that, who say that that matters, that my feelings matter, and the people who either do not have room to say that, they don't know how to do that, they feel like they're betraying something by acknowledging and honoring my feelings, or they dismiss. And so for me personally, it has changed some relationships. The killings of these unarmed African Americans. And that's going to take some time to navigate. And I tend to be a very non-emotional person. So for me to get to a point where I am renegotiating relationships, it's significant for me. So that's what I would say for me personally. For my students in our campus ministry, it has just increased our sort of desire to be an inclusive space and a space where we talk about these things. And so we created a group called How to Ally, where we're inviting our students to really consider what it means to be an ally to people of color, what it means to be an ally to LGBTQ individuals, what it means to be an ally to differently abled individuals, and getting beyond just slogans and Facebook posts, and really leaning into actual proactive engagement that centers the voices of those who've been marginalized. I don't know if it's so much changed how I do ministry. I do feel a bit of a mandate to make sure that I'm naming these societal ills, these societal sins, and inviting us to remember that, particularly as Wesleyan Christians, we are not people who pull in and only think about ourselves and our own salvation and our own well-being, but we are people who are descended from abolitionists and defenders of the poor and people who visited people in prison. That's our spiritual heritage, and that's what we need to keep moving forward. And so I do feel this sense, this need, this burden even, to name that, to say that, to mention that. And I try to mention those kinds of ideas of being people who pursue justice, not because it's a cool political slogan. We pursue justice because we serve a God of justice. God has decreed justice from God's throne, according to the Psalms. And so we must be people who live out and who embody and who, in many respects, demand justice of people who say that they are at the very least sympathetic to the voice of followers of Jesus. So in that respect, I guess it has added some layers to the things that I say out loud.